Good afternoon. My name is Gina Brockstrom, and I work for the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. NCES is responsible for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. For those of you that are new to NAEP, we assess students in a variety of subjects, including reading, math, science, writing, etc. We also ask a set of survey questions to students, teachers, and administrators about their educational experiences inside and outside of the classroom so that we can relate those experiences to student performance. I'm joined today by one of our NAEP State Coordinators from Connecticut, Renée Savoie. Thanks for joining me, Renée.
Hi, Gina. Thanks for having me.
I asked Renée to join me this afternoon to talk a little bit about how states are using NAEP data. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you, Renée, could you tell us a little bit about your role as the NAEP State Coordinator?
Sure. So NAEP State Coordinators have a variety of different roles that they play in their respective states. One, for instance, is around quality assurance. So we work closely with NCES to ensure that the schools and students selected for the assessment are representative of our population. Also, as the NAEP State Coordinator, we work closely with school-level personnel who are coordinating the assessments in their building. So my job really is to keep in constant communication with them so they know what to expect next and so that they feel supported every step of the way. I absolutely recognize that school personnel have a lot on their plates, and NAEP is one more thing. So I want to make sure that the process is efficient, it's smooth, and come assessment day, everybody is well aware of what's going to happen and the students have a seamless experience. And then finally, one of the really important things that NAEP State Coordinators do is when results are released, we take a look at the data, we do some analyses, and then oftentimes produce different kinds of reports. Maybe they are State Board of Education presentations, presentations around our own states. Maybe we're publishing reports on the website or issuing newsletters, but really just trying to get the word out about what NAEP is telling us about achievement in our states.
That's great. I know you and your colleagues do a lot of hard work for the NAEP program. Could you tell us a little bit more about maybe some of the common questions or challenges that you get in your role as the NAEP State Coordinator?
Sure. Well, participation is always a pretty big challenge. Because NAEP employs a survey design, which means that we're not testing in every school in Connecticut, and then within the schools that are selected, not necessarily every student is being tested. And then even at the student level, when students are taking the test, they're not seeing the whole breadth of NAEP items across all content areas. So they're just really seeing a slice of NAEP. And so the advantage of this type of approach is that the burden on students, and particularly on schools and then particularly on students, is much less than, say, what they would experience for an annual state assessment. So the burden's less, but the trade-off is that when we report out, unlike a state assessment, we can't report out in Connecticut at the district, school, or student level. We're limited to national level results, state level results, and then subgroups within our state. Still really important information, but not the same degree of information that you might get from a state assessment, so slightly different. And so when you have that sort of reporting challenge, it can be more difficult to garner support and encourage participation in the assessment.
Thanks, Renée. I know we definitely hear that from your colleagues across the country and when we're working with districts and schools as well. Now to sort of get into a bit of today's topic, I know that you and your colleagues in Connecticut have done a lot of research using NAEP data. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, NAEP achievement results are really kind of what take the spotlight for the most part. They get the most attention. But every NAEP administration, as you mentioned, has a set of survey questionnaires that are administered at the school and teacher and student level. And this information that's collected through the questionnaires serves as great context for the achievement results. So I feel like this data set's pretty unique. Our state assessment doesn't ask any kind of questions like this. So I am able to look at student achievement in a completely different light. I have a couple of examples that I'll share today that are taken right from those questionnaires that are administered as part of the Nape administration. So my first example shows some course taking data. This is taken from the first ever grade 12 state Nape administration that Connecticut participated in. And we were able to get not only achievement data for this group of students, but we were also able to collect a lot of contextual information through the questionnaires. And this got us thinking about the importance of course taking patterns. So the data are clear. In this slide, you'll see that when students take higher level mathematics courses, they perform better on the grade 12 math assessment. And this is absolutely intuitive. However, at the time of the 2009 Nape administration, we really didn't collect or report this level of information in my state. So this was fascinating information at the time. Of course, we are very concerned about achievement gaps in our state, and you'll see in the lower half of the slide that the data show that African American and Hispanic students were taking the highest levels of mathematics courses at a much lower rate than their white peers. So given these course taking patterns, when we think about achievement disparities, they're not entirely surprising. The data certainly revealed to us that we saw an uneven opportunity to learn across student groups. So fast forward a few years, and we've really made some changes in our state as far as data collection and reporting. So in Connecticut now, we report to the public much more extensively on these types of course-taking patterns, and we've actually incorporated into our federally approved accountability system an explicit expectation that all students have opportunities to experience challenging content in high school. And the table shown here is a component of one of our newer reports where we report out the percentage of students taking what could be referred to as more rigorous courses, and it's disaggregated now by student subgroup. And we hope that this type of information, putting it more into the spotlight, is going to get a lot more attention, and we anticipate this will lead to better outcomes for our students. And then I have another example. This second example I have to share concerns student access to technology, which has become a really important topic in many states that are transitioning to computer-based assessments. Connecticut began its transition a few years ago from strictly paper-pencil assessments to a digitally based environment. And even with that transition, there really has been an ongoing discussion about the extent to which all students have access to and enough experience using computers. So rather than rely exclusively on anecdotal information to try to answer this question of equity, I was able to tap into the NAEP survey questionnaire data from the 2015 administration to create kind of a picture of access to technology in classrooms and even at home for our students in grades 4 and 8. And what I found is that while computer access is certainly not universal, a significant percentage of our grade 4 students' teachers, about 93%, report that computers are available at school for teachers and students. But I also wanted to see if that degree of access varied across community types. And we do see a differential degree of access by location as reported in the table on this screen. So more than 90% of students in suburban and rural communities have teachers that report access, computer access for students and teachers. And the percentage is slightly lower in our cities at 89%. And while access at school is certainly important, we want to pay attention to that, I also wanted to explore what about home access? And the NAEP survey questionnaire data allowed me to do this. So I have the next slide shows home access rates. I was able to see the percentage of grade 4 students who report having a computer at home, and I can compare this to our region, in our case the Northeast, and to the national public data. So I've got this relative comparison information, which is super helpful. And again, a breakdown by community type provides some additional insight. And what we see is similar to classroom access. More than 90% of students in suburban and rural communities report access at home. and 83% of students living in our cities report that same access. And remember, that's grade 4. And most of our discussions in Connecticut have really centered on access to technology for our younger students, but NAEP also allows me to look at what our 8th graders are experiencing. And so I have a slide that shows 8th graders and what they report at home, and you can see that a greater percentage of our 8th graders are reporting access to computers at home. Not entirely surprising, but it helps to create a better picture for us. And since the 2015 administration, I know NAEP has continued to ask technology-related questions and through these questionnaires, and they've even really expanded the scope of what they've been asking. So I am really looking forward to accessing the 2017 data when it becomes available in the coming months to see if maybe there's been some significant changes. We'll have to see. And maybe there's other important contextual information that will now be available to me that can complement and inform our policy discussions here in Connecticut.
Thanks, Renee. These are some really great examples of how states and districts are using NAEP data and can continue to use NAEP data. And like you, we're really looking forward to what we see in our upcoming release of the 2017 results. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you've been able to share these findings and what you find in the NAEP data with stakeholders in Connecticut.
Sure. Well, with every release recently, whether it be a state level NAEP release or even a national release, I've really tried to incorporate contextual information from the questionnaires in the materials that I create to share publicly. And NCS, I find, has been really deliberate in the last few administrations. It's become pretty obvious to me that they are making an effort to incorporate that contextual information into the results. I think it makes for a richer release overall, and it makes it much easier for me to just follow their lead and also communicating locally what those questionnaires can tell us about student achievement in our state.
Thanks, Renee. I know we've done a lot here at the national level to really promote the value of the responses to those survey questions. Taking a look at any comments that have coming in while we're doing that, I was wondering if you mentioned that Connecticut has transitioned its state assessment to a digitally based administration. As you know, NAEP has been doing that over the last several years as well. So wondering if you could comment a little bit about how that's been going for Connecticut in their participation in NAEP.
Sure. Well, as you said, we transitioned several years ago. So I think for the students, the adjustment period has kind of passed. They're accustomed to taking assessments digitally at this point. So when the NAEP team enters their classrooms, of course, we got this new group of people that they're not familiar with. So that generates a little bit of excitement. And then they set up the tablets on every student's desktop. And so the students are really eager to sort of start touching the screen and see what the equipment can do. So the interest kind of builds. And then when the test administrators start the session and explain that students are going to go through an individualized tutorial right on the screen to sort of lead them through what to expect in the assessment, they hand every student a set of earbuds and then the magic message that they get to keep the earbuds following the assessment generates another little extra excitement. But beyond that, students are really just ready to go. They are pretty comfortable with taking assessments on computers, and they're good with it.
That's great to hear. We definitely heard a lot about those earbuds too during the 2015 administration, and got a handful of requests to actually get some earbuds for students. So we always love to hear that there's a little something there for the students who participate. I did have one more question for you. We at NCS are also responsible for a series of international assessments, and I know you and your colleagues as NAEP State Coordinators have really stepped up and worked a lot with us on those international assessments. Could you tell us a little bit about how those have gone in Connecticut?
Right. Well, there's really a wide variety of international assessments that are administered across the country at this point. Many of these are actually quite innovative in what they assess, and how the assessments are actually administered. And typically, the students in my state are participating and contributing to national results. But there have been a few instances in the past when we've assessed enough students to be able to secure state level results. So the most recent example of that for Connecticut was with the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, in 2012. So our participation in that assessment allowed us to determine how our students perform in mathematics, reading, and science on an international stage. And overall, we were really quite pleased with the outcomes, and it generated considerable interest while also increasing the visibility of the international programs.
Great, thanks. It's always great to hear about how the assessments and the programs that NCS is responsible for are being used. Before we sign off today, I just wanted to ask if there was anything else that you wanted to share or discuss while we were here.
Sure. Well, for all of you viewing today, I would say if you've been asked to participate in NAEP, whether you're a student or a teacher or a building leader, I sincerely encourage you to accept the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to this really valuable resource. Your participation truly does make a difference, and the data are being used to improve our education system across the country.
Great, thanks. I want to take the opportunity. There was a question that came in. Can you clarify what contextual data will be released on SEL?
Well, I can tell you that I don't have an answer to that specific question, but all of the questionnaires from the 2017 administration are available on the NCES website. So you can take a look at all of the student questions that were asked, all the teacher questions, and all the building level questions. And perhaps there's something in there that you'd find of connected to social emotional learning.
Thanks, Renee. We have done, as you mentioned, we do make all of those questionnaires available to the public so that you can sort of see what types of questions and what types of responses you could expect with the release of our data. I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank you, Renee, for joining me this afternoon. I really appreciate you giving us a glimpse into how Connecticut is able to use NAEP data and continues to use it. Thank you very much for your hard work on behalf of the program.
Thank you. This is great.
Okay. And thank you, everyone, for joining me and Renee this afternoon. We really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about NAEP and the Nation's Report Card, please follow us here on Facebook or our Twitter or YouTube account. And have a great afternoon.